I didn't cry when my ex married my cousin. I waited, smiled politely, and brought receipts to the engagement party. My name is Abigail Anderson, and this happened between Charlotte and Charleston, two cities close enough for a weekend drive, far enough apart to pretend secrets won't travel. Apparently, they do. 8 months after my divorce was finalized, my cousin Madison White announced she was engaged. To my ex-husband, Alexander Wilson. If you had asked me a year ago what betrayal would look like in my life, I wouldn't have pictured fireworks or dramatic confessions. I would have pictured exactly what I got: polite smiles, carefully worded explanations, and a rewritten timeline. Madison and I grew up together. Not just holiday cousins, close sleepovers. Shared clothes. She stood next to me at my wedding in a pale blue dress and cried harder than I did during my vows. Alexander and I were married for 7 years. We built a life in Charlotte. A townhouse in Valentine. A golden retriever named Finn. Sunday grocery runs. Separate streaming accounts because we could never agree on what to watch. From the outside, we looked stable. Inside, something had started shifting long before I understood what it was. Alexander worked as a project manager for a commercial construction company. He traveled occasionally, Atlanta, Raleigh, once to Nashville. I worked as a marketing manager for a healthcare network, which meant I noticed patterns for a living. Patterns like phone calls taken outside, screen tilted away, notifications silenced. When I first brought it up, he didn't deny talking to someone. He just labeled it. It's not physical, Abby. It's just someone I can talk to. Someone. I asked who. He said, you don't know her. That was technically true. I didn't know her like that. Because I knew her as my cousin. The marriage didn't implode overnight. It eroded. Alexander started staying late at work more often. Or at least that's what he said. I stopped asking detailed questions because every answer felt rehearsed. One night, around 1:30 a.m., I walked into the kitchen for water and heard him on the back patio. His voice was low, soft, the way he used to talk to me when we were dating. I didn't confront him immediately. I stood inside the dark kitchen, listening through the glass. He laughed quietly and said, I just can't wait until things aren't complicated. That sentence sat in my chest like a stone. When he came back inside, I asked, who are you talking to? He didn't hesitate. A coworker. She's going through stuff. She. I remember nodding. I remember thinking I was being mature, trusting, reasonable. 2 months later, he asked for a separation. It's not about anyone else, he said. I just don't think we're aligned anymore. Aligned. Like we were a misprinted document. The divorce was technically civil. No screaming in court. No dramatic asset fights. Just paperwork, signatures, and a quiet dividing of furniture. But during that entire process, Madison was oddly present. She checked on him. She told me he seemed really broken. She said, I just hope you guys can find peace. I vented to her about my suspicion that there might have been someone else. She told me gently, I really don't think he'd do that to you. I remember feeling comforted by that. 8 months after the divorce was finalized, Madison called me. Her voice was breathless. Excited. I have news, she said. I already knew. You don't need evidence for that kind of knowing. When she told me she and Alexander had reconnected after the divorce, she said it like fate. Like timing had simply shifted. It didn't start until everything was finalized, she added quickly. That detail came fast. Too fast. I asked how long they'd been talking again. Just a few months, she said. A few months. Something in my brain started counting backward automatically. I didn't accuse her. I didn't yell. I said I needed time. Then I poured a glass of wine and opened my laptop. When Alexander moved out, we still had access to our old shared phone account for a billing cycle. I had downloaded statements to cancel the plan. I never deleted the PDFs. I don't know what possessed me to look. Maybe instinct. Maybe self-preservation. The phone logs weren't romantic. They were cold. Columns of numbers and timestamps. But numbers don't lie politely. There it was. Madison's number. Starting 3 months before Alexander asked for a separation. Calls at 11:42 p.m. At 12:17 a.m. 49 minutes. 73 minutes. Repeatedly. Not once. Not twice. Consistently. I stared at the screen so long my eyes blurred. It wasn't proof of anything physical. But it wasn't after. I checked our old shared Google Photos drive. We used it for vacations and dog pictures. Alexander had backed up his phone automatically for years. Buried between photos of Finn and screenshots of home renovation ideas were message captures he must have forgotten were syncing. Inside jokes. Flirty comments. And one message from him. I just can't wait until we don't have to hide. Dated 2 months before he moved out. My hands were steady when I saved everything. Not shaking. Not hysterical. Steady. That was the night something changed in me. Not rage. Clarity. When the engagement party invitation arrived, it was printed on thick cream cardstock. Gold lettering. Hosted at Madison's parents' house in Charleston. String lights. Cocktails. Celebrating new beginnings. My mother, Eleanor Jackson, told me if you don't go, they'll say you're bitter. My older brother, Jackson Anderson, said, you don't owe them anything. I didn't respond to either of them right away. Instead, I reopened the folder on my laptop. Screenshots. Call logs. Metadata. I wasn't planning to use it. I just didn't want to forget what I knew. Because what hurt more than the betrayal was the rewriting. At family dinners, people said things like, sometimes relationships just run their course. At least they were honest after. After. That word kept coming up. As if history started the day paperwork was stamped. The engagement party was held in Madison's parents' backyard in Charleston, brick courtyard, white hydrangeas, catered seafood, soft jazz playing through rented speakers. Alexander wore a navy blazer. Madison wore a white dress that looked suspiciously bridal. When they walked in together, fingers intertwined, smiling at guests, I felt that stillness again. They hugged me. Alexander said, I'm really glad you came. Madison said, I hope this isn't weird. Weird. I smiled. It's fine. And in that moment, I knew something with terrifying calm. I wasn't there to cause a scene. But I wasn't going to let myself become the villain in their edited version either. I had the receipts. And I had time. Looking back, I can't pinpoint one dramatic moment where my marriage cracked. There wasn't a lipstick on a collar or some anonymous text lighting up his phone at dinner. It was smaller than that. Quieter. Alexander and I had built what most people in Charlotte would call a solid life. 2 incomes. No kids yet, but planning to try soon. A townhouse in Valentine with gray cabinets and a patio we kept saying we'd decorate properly. He was a project manager for a commercial construction firm. Structured. Organized. Spreadsheet-brained. I was a marketing manager for a healthcare network, which meant I lived in analytics and messaging. We both liked plans. Until he stopped sharing them. It started with late nights. At first, it made sense. Big project downtown. Delays. Budget issues. He'd come home smelling faintly like sawdust and office coffee, exhausted. Then the pattern shifted. He wasn't tired anymore when he got home late. He was lit up. You know that energy someone has when they've been laughing? That soft hum under their skin? I noticed it before I admitted I noticed it. He started bringing his phone everywhere. Bathroom. Garage. Even outside when he took Finn out at night. One evening, I was sitting on the couch half watching a show when I heard him on the patio. His voice was lower than usual. Not business voice. Not friend voice. Soft. I muted the TV. He laughed and said, You're terrible. Pause. Then, quieter, no, I don't regret it. My stomach dropped in a way that felt almost physical. Like missing a stair in the dark. When he came inside, I asked lightly, Who was that? He didn't flinch. Madison. The air left my lungs for a second. I forced a smile. Oh, what's up with her? She's been stressed at work. HR stuff. We just talked. Just talked. It sounded harmless. Cousins and husbands talk. We'd all spent holidays together. She'd come down to Charlotte a few times for concerts. But something in his tone didn't match the word, just. Over the next few weeks, I noticed more. Inside jokes between them at family dinners. The way Madison would glance at him before finishing a sentence. How he defended her in small, unnecessary ways. One Sunday afternoon, we were at my mom's house in the suburbs outside Charlotte. Madison was visiting from Charleston, where she worked as a human resources specialist. We were all in the kitchen. She made a comment about hating dating apps. Alexander laughed and said, Yeah, you deserve someone who actually listens to you. It was the way he said it. Too personal. Too invested. I caught my brother Jackson watching them from across the room. He didn't say anything, but he noticed. Later that night, when we got home, I asked Alexander directly, Are you talking to Madison a lot? He sighed like I'd asked something exhausting. She's family, Abby. That's not what I asked. He set his phone down carefully. We talk. She vents about work. I vent about stuff. About us. He didn't answer right away. That's not fair, he finally said. That's not a no. I told myself I was being insecure. Paranoid. That divorce stories always sound dramatic, but real life is usually messier and less clear. But then the emotional intimacy shifted. He stopped venting to me entirely. When I'd ask how his day went, I'd get fine. When I'd talk about mine, he'd nod but not really engage. One night I said, It feels like you're not here anymore. He stared at the TV and said, I am here. But he wasn't. He was somewhere else. Probably on his phone. 2 months later, we had our first real fight. I found him smiling at his screen at midnight. I asked who he was texting. He said, Why does it matter? Because it matters. Because it's midnight. Because you used to roll over and talk to me at midnight. I said, Are you emotionally cheating on me? He laughed. Actually laughed. That's not a real thing. My face burned. Then what is this? He stood up, pacing. I'm allowed to have friends. At 1 a.m? She understands me, okay? There it was. She understood him. I remember going very quiet. Who? I asked. He hesitated for half a second too long. Madison. That was the first time it felt undeniable. Not because of proof. Because of the way he said her name. Not defensive. Almost protective. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just said, That makes me uncomfortable. He replied, You're overthinking it. That phrase did more damage than if he'd yelled. overthinking it, as if my instincts were dramatic inconveniences. Over the next month, he started sleeping on the edge of the bed. Literally. Turned away from me. Phone plugged in on his side. I would lie awake and listen to the tiny buzz of notifications. And here's the part I'm not proud of. One night, after he fell asleep, I unlocked his phone. We knew each other's passcodes. I told myself I was just confirming what I already suspected. There weren't explicit messages. Nothing graphic. But there were paragraphs. Long, emotionally intimate paragraphs. Her telling him she felt seen when she talked to him. Him saying he hadn't felt this connected to someone in years. Years. We had been married for 7. One message from him read, "Sometimes I wonder if we met at the wrong time." That was it. No nudity. No hotel bookings. Just emotional betrayal wrapped in plausible deniability. I put the phone back exactly where it was. The next morning, I asked him, "Do you have feelings for her?" He didn't answer immediately. And that silence was louder than anything he could have said. 3 weeks later, he asked for a separation. "It's not about Madison," he said. I didn't argue. Because by then, I knew something he didn't. The relationship might not have been physical yet, but it had already replaced me. And that kind of cheating doesn't leave lipstick. It leaves absence. When he moved out of our townhouse in Charlotte, he hugged me at the door and said, "I never meant to hurt you." I almost believed him. But intention doesn't erase impact. And as I stood in the quiet house after he drove away, I had this strange thought. If this really started after, then why does it feel like I've been the third person in my own marriage for months? The night I went looking for proof, I told myself it was just for closure. Not revenge. Not ammunition. Closure. Alexander had been moved out of the townhouse in Charlotte for 3 weeks. The house felt hollow in a way that didn't match its size. Finn kept sitting by the door around 6 p.m., like he expected footsteps. The divorce paperwork wasn't final yet, but the separation was real. Our dining table was gone. His side of the closet was empty. There were faint square marks on the wall where his framed degrees used to hang. I was sitting at the kitchen island with my laptop open, trying to cancel the last of our shared accounts. That's how it started. Administrative. Cold. I logged into our old mobile carrier account to make sure autopay was disabled. The last billing cycle was still downloadable. I clicked the PDF mostly out of habit. Rows of numbers. Dates. Times. Call durations. It was boring at first. Routine. Work calls. Short check-ins. Nothing remarkable. Then I saw her number. Madison's. I knew it without checking because we'd all been in a family group chat for years. The first call I noticed was from early March. 11:42 at night. 49 minutes. My heart sped up, but I kept scrolling. March 12th. 12:17 a.m. 73 minutes. March 15th. 10:58 p.m. 56 minutes. March 19th. 12:03 a.m. 68 minutes. I went back to my calendar. March was when Alexander started pulling away from me. When he'd said he was stressed. When I'd asked him if we were okay, and he'd said, "We're fine." Those calls weren't happening after the separation. They were happening during my marriage. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling for a long time. It's strange how betrayal feels when it becomes measurable. When it turns into timestamps instead of suspicions. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I was calculating. I downloaded the PDF. Then I downloaded February's statement. Her number appeared there too. Shorter calls at first. 20 minutes. 30. Escalating over time. The pattern was undeniable. I could have stopped there. But something in me needed more than logs. I remembered the shared Google Photos drive. We'd used it for vacations, holidays, random dog pictures. Alexander's phone had been auto-backing up to it for years. When he moved out, I changed the password, but I still had access to the synced content up until the day he left. I opened the folder. Thousands of photos. Screenshots of recipes. Project budgets. Construction site updates. And then, buried in late February, I saw it. A screenshot of a text conversation. He must have captured it and forgotten it would sync. The image was small at first, just a thumbnail. My cursor hovered over it for a full minute before I clicked. There it was. Madison, sometimes I think we met at the wrong time. Alexander, yeah, it's complicated. Madison, do you ever wish things were different? Alexander, all the time. The timestamp was February 28th. We didn't separate until April. I zoomed in further. Another screenshot. Madison, I hate hiding this. Alexander, me too. But not for much longer. That one was dated March 14th. Not for much longer. I felt something inside me harden. This wasn't vague emotional drift. This wasn't accidental closeness. This was anticipation. Planning. I kept scrolling. There were more. Nothing explicit. No hotel bookings. No photos that would make a courtroom gasp. But emotionally, it was intimate in a way that made my stomach twist. Paragraphs about feeling understood. About not being able to talk this freely with anyone else. About waiting. Waiting for what? For me to sign papers? For our marriage to dissolve quietly so they could step into the space without looking like villains? I saved the screenshots. I saved the call logs. I created a folder on my desktop and labeled it simply, Timeline. Not affair. Not evidence. Timeline. Because that's what this was really about. They weren't just in a relationship. They were rewriting the start date. And that mattered. The next morning, I called my divorce attorney's office. I didn't speak to him directly. I spoke to his paralegal, Benjamin Martinez. I didn't mention Madison's name. I just asked, if there was emotional infidelity before a separation, does that change anything legally? Benjamin paused. In North Carolina? Not really, unless there's financial misconduct or documented adultery that affects assets. So if it was just emotional? Morally complicated, he said carefully. Legally irrelevant. That sentence stuck with me. Morally complicated. Legally irrelevant. The law didn't care. But my family would. And so would history. Over the next few weeks, I didn't confront either of them. I finalized the divorce. I split assets. I packed up wedding photos and slid them into a storage box without looking at them. When the papers were stamped, Alexander texted me. I really hope one day we can both look back at this without anger. I stared at that message for a long time. He still hadn't acknowledged her. 3 weeks later, Madison called. Her voice was bright, almost nervous. Abby, I wanted you to hear this from me. I stood at my kitchen counter, staring at the folder labeled Timeline on my laptop. She said, Alexander and we reconnected after everything was finalized. And it just kind of happened. After everything was finalized. There it was. The edited version. I didn't argue on the phone. I didn't bring up March 14th. I didn't mention 12:17 a.m. calls. I just said, how long? A couple months, she replied quickly. A couple months. I almost admired the confidence. After we hung up, I opened the folder again. I looked at the timestamps like they were coordinates on a map. This wasn't about revenge. Not yet. This was about memory. Because I knew how families worked. Holidays would come. Stories would shift. People would say, well, technically nothing happened until after. And eventually, even I might start doubting my own timeline. That's how gaslighting works. Not dramatic lies. Small adjustments. Soft edits. I wasn't going to let that happen. So I backed everything up to a flash drive. Not because I planned to use it, but because I wasn't going to forget. The engagement party invitation arrived 2 weeks later. Cream cardstock. Gold lettering. Celebrating their love story. I ran my thumb over the embossed date. In Charleston. At her parents' house. Under string lights. And for the first time since the divorce, I felt something close to calm. Because now, if they tried to stand in front of everyone and swear nothing happened until after, I wouldn't have to argue. I would just have to read. By the time the divorce was finalized in Mecklenburg County, I had already realized something uncomfortable. The betrayal wasn't going to be the loud part. The loud part was going to be the editing. The paperwork was signed in a beige courtroom in Charlotte. No dramatic speeches. No one cried. Alexander wore a gray suit. I wore a navy dress that felt too professional for what it was. When the judge stamped the final order, it was strangely anticlimactic. 7 years reduced to signatures. Outside the courthouse, Alexander said, I really don't want there to be bad blood between us. I looked at him and thought, you don't get to curate this ending. But I didn't say that. I just nodded and walked to my car. The first few weeks after were quiet. Painfully quiet. I moved from the townhouse into a smaller apartment near South End. Sold furniture. Split the savings. Divided books like we were splitting custody of paper. Finn stayed with me. That part wasn't even debated. Madison didn't contact me during the legal process. Not once. But she started appearing in subtler ways. Family group chats shifted tone. My Aunt Elizabeth would text things like, so proud of Madison for finding happiness again. Again. As if she'd been the one divorced. Then, 3 weeks after the final decree, Madison posted a photo. Nothing obvious. Just a Charleston sunset with the caption. Sometimes timing is everything. Timing. I stared at that word like it was daring me. Because the timeline sat on a flash drive in my desk drawer. The following Sunday, my mother, Eleanor Jackson, invited me over for dinner. My brother Jackson was there too. He works as an electrician, and he's not emotional by nature, but he notices things. Halfway through dinner, my mom said carefully, I heard Madison and Alexander have been talking. I kept my fork steady. I know, I said. Mom hesitated. They told everyone it didn't start until after. There it was again. After. I met her eyes. Do you believe that? I asked. She looked uncomfortable. I think sometimes emotional connections happen before people realize what they are. That was her social worker voice. Neutral. Measured. Jackson cleared his throat. It looked like more than that at Christmas. I glanced at him. You noticed? Hard not to, he said. He was glued to her. Mom shot him a warning look, but the damage was done. It wasn't just in my head. Still, the narrative kept solidifying. At a cousin's birthday dinner in Charlotte, I overheard my uncle tell someone, at least they waited until the divorce was final. Waited. I felt like I was watching my own history get repackaged in real time. No one asked me directly what I thought. They didn't want that answer. Because if it wasn't after, then it meant they'd been watching emotional cheating happen inside family boundaries. And that's messy. Easier to smooth it over. Madison finally called me a month after the Instagram post. She asked if we could talk woman to woman. We met at a coffee shop in Charleston when I was there for work. Neutral ground, she said. She looked nervous when she walked in. Alexander wasn't with her. I never meant to hurt you, she started. That sentence felt rehearsed. I let her talk. She said they'd grown closer during my separation. That conversations just shifted. That she hadn't planned to fall for him. And nothing happened until after, she added, watching my face carefully. I held her gaze. Madison, I said slowly, define happened. She blinked. I mean physical. So that was the loophole. I leaned back in my chair. Do you think emotional intimacy doesn't count? She swallowed. You and Alexander were already falling apart. That one landed. Maybe we were. But that didn't make the timing irrelevant. I didn't pull out my phone. I didn't mention timestamps. Not yet. I just said, you knew I was scared he was talking to someone. Her face flushed. I didn't know it would turn into this. That wasn't an answer. That was an escape hatch. When I drove back to Charlotte that night, I felt strangely hollow. Because I realized something important. They weren't going to admit it. Not privately. Not publicly. They were going to stick to the clean version. And over time, clean versions win. 2 weeks later, the engagement announcement went public. Professional photos. Alexander in a light blue button-down. Madison in white. Ring sparkling against Charleston cobblestone. The caption read, after everything we've both been through, we found our way to each other at the right time. The right time. Comments flooded in. So meant to be. Timing is God's plan. Beautiful second chance. I read every single one. Not because I wanted to torture myself. Because I wanted to see how quickly reality can be replaced. That night, I opened the timeline folder again. I scrolled through the March calls. The February screenshots. I thought about how easily I could send them to family group chats. Post them publicly. Tag them. But that felt reactive. Messy. What bothered me most wasn't the relationship. It was the implication that I'd been paranoid. That our marriage had simply run its course. That I'd misread everything. I didn't want revenge. I wanted accuracy. When the engagement party invitation arrived formal, embossed, optimistic, I almost laughed. Celebrating their love story. Love story. I stared at the date. At the venue in Charleston. I could decline. Stay home. Let them have their curated night. But I knew exactly what would happen if I didn't show. She's bitter. She can't move on. She's trying to make it about herself. The irony of that wasn't lost on me. Because it had always been about timing. And timing was something I could measure. I called my coworker and closest friend, Riley Quinn, that night. I'm thinking of going, I told her. To the party? She asked. Yes. And doing what? I hesitated. Nothing dramatic. She was quiet for a second. Abby, you don't sound like someone planning nothing. I smiled slightly. I just don't want to be rewritten. There was a long pause on the other end. Then don't let them, she said. That was the moment I realized something. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to accuse. If the subject of timing came up publicly, all I had to do was read the dates. And let silence do the rest. The drive from Charlotte to Charleston is about 3.5 hours if traffic behaves. That afternoon, it didn't. Which felt fitting. I left early. Told myself I could still turn around at any point. Exit ramp after exit ramp. I gave myself permission to quit. I didn't. By the time I crossed into Charleston, the sky had that warm coastal haze that makes everything look softer than it is. Spanish moss hanging from trees. Brick sidewalks. Pastel houses that look like they've never heard bad news. Madison's parents live in a historic-style home near downtown. White exterior. Black shutters. Courtyard backyard with string lights already glowing even though the sun hadn't fully set. I parked 2 streets over so I wouldn't have to do the awkward driveway arrival. Sat in my car for a full minute. Checked my reflection. Checked my phone. The folder labeled timeline wasn't open. But it was there. I wasn't dressed dramatically. Just a simple navy dress. Neutral heels. Nothing that said ex-wife making a statement. When I walked through the gate, I heard laughter. Soft jazz playing from rented speakers. The smell of seafood and something citrusy. It looked beautiful. Of course it did. Elizabeth Moore was greeting guests near the entrance, glass of champagne in hand. When she saw me, her smile froze for half a second before recovering. Abigail. I'm so glad you came. Her tone was overly bright. Wouldn't miss it, I said. That wasn't entirely a lie. I wouldn't miss this. Madison was across the courtyard, wearing a white dress that felt almost bridal. Not engagement party casual. Something more deliberate. Alexander stood beside her, navy blazer, hand resting lightly at the small of her back. That detail hit harder than I expected. That had been my spot. They saw me at the same time. There was a flicker across both of their faces. Surprise? Tension? Calculation? Madison walked toward me first. She hugged me. It was a careful hug. Not full weight. Not genuine. I'm really glad you came, she said quietly. I know this isn't easy. Interesting choice of words. Alexander stepped forward next. Hey, Abby. He said my name gently, like we were old friends. I'm glad you're here. I studied his face. There was no guilt there. Just hope. Hope that I'd behave. I wouldn't miss family, I replied. That word felt sharp in my mouth. The first 45 minutes were almost surreal. I made small talk with cousins I hadn't seen in months. I told distant relatives work was good. I laughed politely at a joke from my uncle about Charleston humidity. The whole time, I could feel glances. People checking my expression. Waiting to see if I'd crack. At one point, Jackson texted me. You good? I typed back, fine. Which was true in a way. Because I wasn't unraveling. I was observing. Madison and Alexander stayed close to each other, hands linked or shoulders touching. Subtle but constant. Like they were proving something. As the sun dipped lower, Elizabeth clinked a spoon against a champagne glass. Everyone, if you could gather. Guests shifted toward the center of the courtyard. Madison squeezed Alexander's hand and stepped forward. She looked radiant. Confident. Thank you all for being here, she began. This past year has been complicated. Complicated. There it was. She spoke about growth. About finding love when you least expect it. About second chances. Alexander followed her. I know some of you might have questions about timing, he said with a small, rehearsed laugh. Timing. My spine went straight. He continued, but I want to be clear, nothing happened until after my divorce was finalized. We respected that boundary. The word boundary almost made me laugh. Madison nodded. We would never cross that line. And then she did something I hadn't fully anticipated. She looked at me. Not long. But enough. That look said, this is the story now. I felt the courtyard go quiet in a way that had nothing to do with volume. They weren't just defending themselves. They were establishing the official version. Publicly. I could have stayed silent. I could have let it pass. But something inside me, not rage, not jealousy, something steadier rose up. It wasn't about humiliation. It was about correction. Someone from the crowd called out playfully, speech from the cousin. A few people laughed. And before I could second-guess myself, I heard my own voice say, sure. It didn't shake. That surprised me. I stepped forward slowly. The gravel under my heels sounded louder than it should have. Madison's smile tightened. Alexander's jaw flexed. I accepted the champagne glass someone handed me, but I didn't drink. I looked around at the faces in the courtyard. Family. People who had watched my wedding. People who had watched my divorce. I just want to say, I began, keeping my tone light, I agree. Timing matters. A ripple of uneasy laughter. I pulled my phone from my clutch. Not dramatically. Just casually. I was going through old account paperwork when we separated last year, I continued. Canceling shared plans, downloading statements. You know how that goes. Alexander's face drained of color. Madison's fingers tightened around his. I came across some interesting timestamps, I said. Late night calls. February. March. Before the separation. The courtyard went still. I didn't rush. I didn't accuse. I read. March 12th, 12:17 a.m. 73 minutes. I glanced up briefly. March 14th. Message that said, I can't wait until we don't have to hide. A sharp inhale from somewhere near the back. I'm not here to label anything, I continued calmly. Emotional. Physical. Whatever helps everyone sleep at night. I let that hang. But it definitely wasn't after. Silence. Not the polite kind. The heavy kind. Madison tried to laugh. Abigail, I think you're misinterpreting. I cut in gently. Totally possible. That's why I double-checked the timestamps. Alexander stepped forward. This isn't the time. I met his eyes. You made it about timing. No yelling. No tears. Just facts. Elizabeth's face had gone pale. Michael looked like someone had knocked the air out of him. Jackson, across the courtyard, wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Alexander. And then I did the only thing that mattered. I stepped back. I hope you both are happy, I said evenly. And I sat down. The music didn't start back up. For a full 30 seconds, no one moved. Then the murmuring began. Whispers. Side conversations. A cousin quietly slipping toward the exit. Tyler Morgan, Madison's brother, walked straight past the drink table and out the gate without saying goodbye. Alexander leaned toward Madison, speaking urgently. Her expression had shifted from confidence to something closer to panic. Within 15 minutes, half the guests had left. No screaming. No dramatic confrontation. Just a slow unraveling. I stayed for another 10 minutes. Long enough to make it clear I wasn't running. Then I set my untouched champagne glass on a side table and walked toward the gate. As I passed Alexander, he said under his breath, "You didn't have to do that." I didn't stop walking. "You didn't have to lie," I replied. And then I left. The night air outside felt cooler than it had earlier. For the first time in a year, I felt steady. Not victorious. I didn't wait for a dramatic confrontation. I didn't wait for Madison to run after me or for Alexander to grab my arm and demand I take it back. I walked out of that courtyard in Charleston, got into my car, and sat there with the engine off for almost a full minute. My hands weren't shaking. That surprised me. I'd expected adrenaline. Maybe guilt. What I felt instead was something quieter. Like a pressure valve had finally released. My phone started buzzing before I even pulled out of the neighborhood. Jackson. You okay? Riley. Oh my God. Call me. An unknown number I assumed was Alexander. I didn't answer any of them. I drove. The highway at night between Charleston and Charlotte is long and mostly dark. It gave me space to replay everything. I didn't insult them. I didn't exaggerate. I read timestamps. That's it. And yet the impact felt nuclear. By the time I got home, there were 2 voicemails. The first was from Madison. Her voice was tight, controlled. How could you do that? You humiliated us. You twisted things. We told you nothing physical happened. Physical. That word again. The second voicemail was from Alexander. You blindsided us, Abby. That was unnecessary. Unnecessary. I sat on my couch in my quiet apartment and stared at the wall for a long time. Unnecessary would have been screaming. Unnecessary would have been forwarding screenshots to the entire extended family. I had corrected the record in the exact moment they chose to formalize the lie. The next morning, my mom called. Her tone wasn't angry. It was complicated. You caused a scene, she said gently. I read dates, I replied. There was a pause. Did you need to do it there? That was the question everyone was really asking. I leaned back against the couch. They chose there to say it didn't start until after. She sighed. People are talking. I know. Madison's wedding is probably going to be postponed. I closed my eyes. There it was. The consequence. I didn't cancel it, I said quietly. Their timeline did. Mom didn't respond to that. Over the next week, the ripple effects spread. Family group chats went silent. A few cousins texted me privately. One said, I always thought something was off. Another wrote, you were brave. Brave. I didn't feel brave. I felt tired. Alexander sent a long message 3 days later. He said I'd acted out of spite. That we had agreed to move forward peacefully. That I could have come to him privately. That part almost made me laugh. Come to him privately. Like I hadn't done that for months in my marriage. Like I hadn't asked directly if he had feelings for her. Like I hadn't given him chance after chance to tell the truth when it mattered. I typed out a reply and deleted it 3 times. Finally I sent. You made it public. He never responded. 2 weeks later, Madison's social media changed. The engagement photos were still up. But the wedding date disappeared from her bio. Then came the announcement. Due to personal reasons, we've decided to postpone our wedding while we focus on us. Focus on us. Translation. The story cracked. I heard through Jackson that Michael Moore was furious. Not at me. At Alexander. Apparently, when pressed privately, Alexander admitted they'd grown close before the separation. Not physical, he maintained. But close enough that even Madison's parents couldn't pretend it was clean. Madison stopped responding to family group chats entirely. I didn't reach out. I didn't need to. About a month after the party, I booked a solo weekend trip to the Great Smoky Mountains. No dramatic reason. I just needed air. The cabin was small. Wood floors. 1 bedroom. A porch facing trees that felt older than my entire family drama. I sat out there the first night wrapped in a blanket, listening to insects and wind moving through branches. That's when the guilt tried to creep in. Maybe I didn't need to do it publicly. Maybe I could have let it fade. But then I thought about how easily reality bends when no one challenges it. If I had stayed silent, the official version would have solidified. They met after. They were respectful. Abigail was insecure. That would have become the story. And I would have slowly started questioning my own memory. That's the part people don't talk about with emotional betrayal. It makes you doubt your instincts more than anything physical ever could. Up in the mountains, I realized something uncomfortable. I didn't actually want revenge. If I wanted revenge, I would have humiliated them harder. I wanted balance. They stood under string lights and told everyone a polished version. I introduced the footnotes. That's it. A week after I got back, Madison finally texted me. Just 1 line. I hope you're happy. I stared at it for a while. I didn't feel happy. I felt finished. I replied, I hope you tell the truth next time. She didn't answer. It's been 4 months now. The wedding is still postponed. I heard they're in counseling. I haven't seen either of them since. Family gatherings are smaller lately. More careful. No one brings up timing anymore. And me? I'm not angry. I'm not waiting for karma. I'm not stalking their updates. I wake up in my apartment in Charlotte, drink my coffee, take Finn on his morning walk, and feel something I didn't feel for most of last year. Clarity. But here's the part one still wrestle with. I chose the moment. I could have corrected the timeline privately. I could have been the bigger person and let them have their celebration untouched. Instead, I waited until they made the lie public and answered it publicly. I didn't scream. I didn't insult. I read dates. So, was that revenge? Or was it just refusing to let my own story be rewritten?